Verse 1, the wisest of women builds her house, but folly with her own hands tears it down. Whoever walks in uprightness fears the Lord, but he who is devious in his ways despises him. By the mouth of a fool comes a rod for his back, but the lips of the wise will preserve them. Where there are no oxen, the manger is clean, but abundant crops come by the strength of the ox. A faithful witness does not lie, but a false witness breathes out lies. A scoffer seeks wisdom in vain, but knowledge is easy for a man of understanding. Leave the presence of a fool, for there you do not meet words of knowledge. The wisdom of the prudent is to discern his way, but the folly of fools is deceiving. Fools mock at the guilt offering, but the upright enjoy acceptance. The heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy. The house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will flourish. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Even in laughter the heart may ache, and the end of joy may be grief. The backslider in heart will be filled with the fruit of his ways, and a good man will be filled with the fruit of his ways. The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps. One who is wise is cautious and turns away from evil, but a fool is reckless and careless. A man of quick temper acts foolishly, and a man of evil devices is hated. The simple inherit folly, but the prudent are crowned with knowledge. The evil bow down before the good, the wicked at the gates of the righteous. The poor is disliked even by his neighbor, but the rich has many friends. Whoever despises his neighbor is a sinner, but blessed is he who is generous to the poor. Do they not go astray who devise evil? Those who devise good meet steadfast love and faithfulness. In all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty. But the crown of the wise is their wealth, but the folly of fools brings folly. A truthful witness saves lives, but one who breathes out lies is deceitful. In the fear of the Lord one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, that one may turn away from the snares of death. In a multitude of people is the glory of a king, but without people a prince is ruined. Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. Whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him. The wicked is overthrown through his evil doing, but the righteous finds refuge in his death. Wisdom rests in the heart of a man of understanding, but it makes himself known even in the midst of fools. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. A servant who deals wisely has the king's favor, but his wrath falls on one who acts shamefully. 4 questions. Which of these proverbs speaks to you? What puzzles you? What surprises you? And what offends you? We will get to that here in just a second, but there is a couple of things I wanted to point out in verses 15 and 16. Both of these verses are antithetic parallelisms on their own, but then together they're also an antithetic parallelism, a single one. I changed the wording on some of these because I'm trying to get more to what the words mean. I compared multiple translations and looked at the Hebrew words behind them. So I'm pretty sure this is still an accurate representation of what these two proverbs mean. But I did choose the wording especially to emphasize the connections between them. So in verse 15, the gullible believes everything, the prudent considers his steps. In verse 16, the wise is cautious and eschews evil, a fool trespasses carelessly. In each one of these, it's the action that is connected in the parallelism. So believing everything is contrasted with being cautious and avoiding evil. And considering his steps is contrasted with trespassing carelessly. So the ESV says, but a fool is reckless and careless. King James Version has, the fool rageth and is confident. But that word for rageth, abar, means to pass over or away or through something or to transgress. And I think it is deliberately being contrasted with the prudent who is considering where he's walking. So the prudent person watches his step. The fool doesn't care where he walks. And it's not just that there's a parallelism here. There's also a chiasm in the same verse. If you look at the person who's doing the actions or the person that's being talked about, it's formed into a chiasm. The fool is on the outside and the wise man is on the inside. So the gullible believes everything and the fool trespasses carelessly, same person. The prudent considers his steps, and the wise is cautious. Same person. The wise and prudent on the inside, gullible and fool on the outside. And this is really just like, so almost all of these proverbs are antithetic parallelisms where they're contrasting the behavior of a fool with the behavior of the wise man. All right, volunteers. Who wants to go first? Anybody have any verses that spoke to you?
I hate to be obvious, but the one we always quote to everybody, verse 12 is the one that speaks to me, because I'm always trying to get ahead of the Lord when I plan stuff. And just give you an example, this morning, normally when I first wake up, before my feet hit the floor, I sit on the side of the bed and pray. Well, this morning I was just kind of out of sorts, so I didn't. And everything that possibly could go wrong did. And I know but as I had to go and get 2 tires for my mom's car. And on the way down the road, I was praying, Lord, give me favor with whoever I come across today. It was just a beautiful thing that happened. I won't tell the whole thing, but it's just, that verse has always kind of helped me to slow down, to try and wait on guidance.
It is a good one. It says a whole lot. I think that one verse just about summarizes the entire book of Proverbs. What about you, Daniel? Any thoughts? Any particular Proverbs that spoke to you, or do you want to comment on that one?
A different one. Something that spoke to me was verse 13. I think right off the one, he said, even in laughter, the heart can be sad, and joy may end in sorrow. That's the CJB, what I'm reading out of, Complete Jewish Bible. So that just seemed kind of,
yeah, you feel that one.
Yeah, it's just, you can be laughing inside and still be sad. And even your joy may end in sorrow. I think it's connected to the previous verse, isn't it? Verse 12, maybe? Or is it separate to itself?
Well, I don't think that any of these proverbs are really placed randomly. I think whoever it is that arranged them put them where they are on purpose. I don't know exactly what they were thinking, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't random.
Yeah, I don't think it's random. It's just, it's odd because it's between one verse that says what he just said, what Robbie was talking about, and then it's behind the verse of a backslider is filled in his own ways, but a good person gets satisfaction from himself. That may be more tied together. The last verse, 14 and 13, may be tied together. I'm not sure. But anyway, but my point was that the laughter in the heart can be sad. That just, you look at people that are comedians or people who are always laughing, and those are some of the most people that are sad most of the times. On the inside, they're the people that are depressed.
Robin Williams?
Yeah, Robin Williams, exactly. This right here is telling me this is temporal. This laughter and this joy is temporal, because it's not the joy of the Lord. Scripture says the joy of the Lord is my strength. This is talking about worldly laughter and worldly joy, I think, as well. And it can end in sadness and sorrow, because sad is, of course, the opposite of laughter. You're crying. Sorrow, I think, is more into depression, more toward that angle, and grieving, depression and grieving. But it's just interesting that I've seen this with like Robin Williams. Even when somebody tells you somebody's died, sometimes you'll laugh about it, like in disbelief. It's just one of those. That's what happened with my granddad. Somebody, and it wasn't even their place to tell me. I was at school as a teacher that told me before my parents did. And they said my granddad had died, and I just laughed at her because I wasn't sure that it had even happened. And he, of course, had committed suicide. And and I was at school, and this is like close to when, not too long after 9/11 happened. This was the November after 9/11. And that laughter it's either a mockery laughter, a disbelief laughter, or just something that just worldly, very worldly,
Yeah.
situational.
I
But anyway,
don't think that we ever exist in any single emotional state. I mean, we are
no.
complicated beings, and we can have hate and sorrow all at the same time. We can have
Yeah.
anger and kindness, and we can have hate and love all at the same time, all directed to the same person.
Oh yeah.
At least talking about emotions. Even with actions, you've heard of the backhanded compliment. It's like you can be kind and mean to somebody at the same time.
Yeah, like sarcasm.
I don't think that's really what this is talking about, but there's a verse 30. A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. And this is actually the one that I put for offending me, because this concept really kind of irritates me. And part of that goes to what you're saying here, Daniel. And I think this verse really does apply to even to spiritual godly joy and sorrow, because a tranquil heart gives life to the flesh. And it's talking about your inner peace will create inner health. If you are a happy person, you will tend to be healthier. And if you are sad, conflicted, angry, whatever, that's going to show up in health problems. The problem I have with it is that if you are fearing God and you are really trying to live a righteous life and to understand God's ways, how can you look at the world around us and not be angry and distressed by it? And so there's this conflict, and it's like, how can I have a tranquil heart in this world? And isn't that just setting me up for failure? Ultimately, there are ways, to be happy even in the worst circumstances. Paul talks about being content even though he's in prison and nobody cares enough to help him. But he has learned to be content in whatever circumstance God puts him in. And I'm certain that the Roman world was way worse than ours right now. Ours is pretty bad, but we still have scriptures easy at hand. Everybody knows, or at least has heard of, the 10 Commandments. Everybody has had some instruction in a Bible-based morality because it infuses our entire culture, even if a large part of our culture is in rebellion against it. But they can't rebel against something that isn't there. In Rome, they didn't even have that. They had a thoroughly pagan culture that had no concept of the one true God. And yet, Paul was in prison, he was beaten, he was stoned. Still, he said he had peace. So I'd like to be there someday.
I think it's having that feeling of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, that makes the difference there. Because I just had a remembrance. God brought this to my mind. I know this is from a secular source, but the struggle between, if anybody's ever seen the movie The Matrix, the scene where Neo, the hacker, is fighting against this agent who's part of the system, the computer system. He's fighting a computer program is what he's doing. And he's struggling, he's getting beat up and all this stuff. But then something happens and he realizes that he's fighting a computer program and he's not fighting a human being. He's not fighting flesh and blood. He's fighting against something else that's not human. And then in that instance, he's able to defeat him because he's able to see past the physical into another realm or into another for what it really is. So I just thought that was applicable.
Yeah, that is a good connection.
But yes, my thoughts.
Thank you. If you're available to speak, Sarah, is there any particular verses in here that stood out to you as especially meaningful?
For me, it's the first one, because I've experienced the difference between the first and second half of verse 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
Being a woman, I've been the one to feel like I'm going to end it all, and I've been the one to step back and say, no, what am I doing? This is wrong, and quietly win it all back the right way. So I could either build it or I could tear it down. And to me, that's extremely huge, because every moment of every day with my son, with my daughter, it's building up not only my house, but their houses one day, or tearing them down by giving them It's not just my own, it's my children, and their future houses. And it's a very huge passage for me. It's not just 2 lines in my world,
Yeah. Yeah. And there is a lot there. I mean, if you look back, I think it's at Proverbs 8 where it talks about where it personifies wisdom and foolishness as 2 women and contrasts them, and how the woman wisdom builds her house, and, she's hewn out her 7 pillars, and she set the table and set this big fancy feast. And the theme behind it is that she's looked at the details. She's prepared ahead of time. She has not been waiting for anything to happen, but she's been making it happen. And she is preparing her house for guests. So it's not just for her. It's for the people who live in her house and the people who will be invited in. Compare that with the foolish woman who sits in her door, who yells at people from her doorway and says, come and drink some stolen water and bread. And won't that be great? Like, over here, I've got this fancy house with a great feast and spiced wine. And over here, I've got stolen bread and water sitting in a doorstep. I'm not sure what the attraction is.
Even with the virgins that have oil and have not. Mm-hmm. Are you prepared? Are we preparing? Are we tearing up our house? Are we building it up? Are we readying ourselves for the bridegroom? What are we doing?
Yeah, I know that until we get to Proverbs 31, this entire book is written from the perspective of a father speaking to his sons, or a king speaking to his subjects, depending on how you want to interpret that. But mostly we assume that it's Solomon or some other king speaking to his sons, giving them advice on how to live. But a lot of the advice he gives is about choosing a good wife. And so, although the lessons are directed at men, there is a target there that he creates for women also. Then the reverse happens in Proverbs 31, where this is about the ideal woman, but there's a whole lot there that you can learn about the man who creates an environment that this woman can become the Proverbs 31 woman. And we'll get there and talk about that. What is that, like 4 months out in the future now, but we'll get there. All right. Paula, did you have any verses that stood out to you in here?
So verse 4, where there are no oxen, the manger is clean, but much revenue comes by the strength of the ox, is what my translation says. And that really struck me, probably because of some things that are going on in my life and some things I'm contemplating. And it made me think about the fact that you can have a clean manger, but, like, an ox keeps things dirty. You have to clean up after it. But it's also very productive. And so you can kind of choose to avoid the mess, or you can actually gain something from the animal that you have or that you're taking care of. And I thought that was really interesting, the way that it was worded, because it just makes me think about, like, a lot of the decisions we make when we start to do a cost benefit analysis. Sometimes we don't want the responsibility or the mess that might come, but we're never going to get the benefits of it either. So it just struck me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got to wonder, when some project is too clean, too orderly, I have to wonder if anything is really being accomplished, or if it's just progress is so slow that, if we just sped things up and just started acting, it might be messy. There might be a little bit of chaos, but we'd sure get a lot more. All right. So puzzles. What verse puzzles you? All the ones that I chose are somehow at the very end of the chapter. I'm going to verse 33. Wisdom rests in the heart of a man of understanding, but it makes itself known even in the midst of fools. It's not really, I think, the verse itself that was puzzling me, but the difference in translations. The English Standard Version is supposedly a fairly literal translation, but I've noticed that in the Proverbs and Psalms, places where the translation can be very difficult, that's where it really diverges from others. In this verse, wisdom rests in the heart of the discerning, and even among fools, she is known. That's the Tree of Life version. In Young's literal, in the heart of the intelligent, wisdom doth rest, and in the midst of fools, it is known. All of these kind of say the same thing, although they're using different words. But the King James seems to be saying something completely different. Wisdom resteth in the heart of him that hath understanding, but that which is in the midst of fools is made known. That which is, see that it's in italics. And this is the other translation that I went to first after I read the ESV. And that's what kind of confused me. It's like, why would there be such a difference until you realize that these three words aren't actually in the Hebrew? Wisdom resteth in the heart of him that hath understanding, but in the midst of fools it is made known. And this is one of those principles that if you pay attention to people, if you let them talk long enough, and if you let them act long enough, they will show you who they are. If you're paying attention, a fool makes himself known by his folly. And a wise person, a person of understanding, makes himself known because of his prudent decisions. And even in the midst of fools, a fool may not know another fool. Which is one of the reasons why they get themselves into so much trouble. They can't recognize the foolishness in somebody else, and so they join forces and make things even worse. But they usually recognize that a person is wise. They don't recognize it enough to follow their advice, but they can say, that person's got a lot of wisdom. I'm not going to listen to him. There's a big disconnect there. I don't understand how that happens. Well, I mean, I do, because we're all there sometimes. I can look back at times when somebody gave me good advice, and it was only years later that I realized that I was given good advice, even though all along I knew that this person knew more than I did and was much wiser, had a lot more experience. But because I thought I knew better, I ignored that advice and made a bad decision. Experience is the best teacher of wisdom, I think. You can study and talk forever, but until you actually do, your wisdom is just academic. It's just knowledge. Sometimes doing requires failing. Anybody else? Anybody else puzzled by anything in this chapter? Sarah?
I mean, I kind of get it, but it would be really nice to hear maybe someone else. Verse 4, where there are no oxen, the manger is clean, but abundant crops come from the strength of an ox. I mean, I kind of get it, but can you maybe help me clarify that the way that maybe you would explain that, please? Because I've heard that before.
This was the one that Paula brought up as speaking to her. It's really about where work is getting done, where things are being accomplished, there's going to be mess. You can't, as a mother with small children, I'm sure you're aware that if you've got kids around, there's going to be a mess. If the house is clean, it's clean for about 10 minutes. And it's the same with any big enterprise. This was written in an agrarian culture, and that makes total sense. They knew about oxen and stuff like that. The oxen is what they used to plow their fields, and that was that was their tractor. And in our world, I live out in the country in a bunch of ranches, and I drive down some of these back roads, and you see barns. The wealthier properties, their barns are all in great shape. But most properties, they've got outbuildings that are falling apart. They've got tractors parked under trees. They've got stuff everywhere. And it's because they just don't have the time or the resources to clean up after themselves. They've got too much work to do. And I think that's true in any really productive enterprise.
That clarification. I kind of thought maybe that's what it's saying, but parts of it, just the way that it's written, you got to kind of interpret some of those things.
Robbie, was there something you wanted to say?
Verse 19 is the one that, I don't know if it puzzles me. Understand that times were different back then, but I kind of wonder if I'm not reading it wrong or whatever. But, and then, of course, verse 20 right after it, but, the evil bow down before the good. I get the wicked at the gates of the righteous part, but the evil bow down before the good. It must have been a different society back then.
Yeah, it goes back to that thing about the Proverbs, is that they're about principles rather than precepts. And this is the ideal. But also I think that tense, I don't mistake anything I'm saying about Hebrew and to think that I actually know a bunch of Hebrew. I have a smattering of Hebrew vocabulary. Grammar, I know next to nothing. But tense seems to be a complicated thing in Hebrew, that a lot of times in scripture, something can be future or present tense, and you can't really tell from the text. And if you look at other translations here, like Young's literal, the evil have bowed down before the good, and the wicked at the gates of the righteous. But the tree of life, evil men will bow down in the presence of the good. So there's not even an agreement among translators about whether this is past, present, or future. My tendency is to interpret this as future, because that fits with my idea of eschatology, that eventually evil men will bow down before the good and the wicked at the gates of the righteous, even though right now the wicked own the gates. So where are the gates of the righteous? I'd like to know that. We know that they're at the gates of the New Jerusalem. Those are certainly the gates of the righteous, but we can't see that right now. The wicked won't even see that gate. Does that make sense? Yeah, I think also there's the general principle that over time, evil people tend to weed themselves out. And there are a couple of places in this chapter where it talks about wicked people get wickedness back. If, whatever you do, it comes back to you.
Right.
Yeshua talked about this too, that whatever you sow, that's what you're going to reap. And so you look at people who live a wild life. Well, they tend to die young. Wicked people tend to die younger and tend to be poorer than righteous people. But, that's not a hard and fast rule. I mean, obviously you can look at the most wealthy people. I don't see a whole lot of righteousness there. And you look at the poorest people, and I don't necessarily see a lot of wickedness there either. People are just people. But I think there's another verse 24. The crown of the wise is their riches, but the folly of fools is foolishness. That seems a little redundant in that last part. Folly of fools brings folly, which is even worse in the ESV. But that first part, the crown of the wise is their wealth. And the word for wealth really does mean material riches. And wisdom frequently brings material wealth. Making good decisions from day to day does make a person better off. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be rich, but they will be richer than they would have been if they weren't wise. And there was something specific about this. Oh yeah. I think that this really illustrates that principle. I don't remember who wrote it. Some historian or politician or something said this, but hard times make hard men. And then hard men make good times make weak men, and weak men make hard times. And it's this same cycle. You can contrast this idea that the crown of the wise is their wealth with statements that Yeshua made and that James made about wealthy. How difficult it is for a rich man to get into heaven because he's got so much baggage with him. Setting aside the whole eye of the needle and the camel thing, I'm not really sure that our traditional understanding of that is correct, but the idea is correct. That all of these responsibilities of the world and our wealth tends to get in our way. These things are barriers to righteous living. But this wealth was usually accumulated through following the principles of wisdom and righteousness. Hard work, dedication, discipline. Even a person who hates God can follow these principles and gain a lot of wealth. But then once that wealth is gained, it promotes licentiousness, wicked behavior, which then destroys the wealth. And then you start the cycle all over again. It's a dirty stable with a bunch of ox in it. It's a mess.
Verse 3 puzzled me.
Mm-hmm.
I'd seen a couple things I didn't notice before about verse 3. I think the word fool used in that in the Hebrew is evil. It's actually spelled evil in Hebrew. I thought that was interesting.
Interesting.
I've never seen in the Hebrew, usually someone who is evil is spelled ra with R-A, R-A, but, transliterated is R-A, but a fool is evil, if you think about it. It's just I'd never seen nothing like that before. That just blew my mind. And it says he sprouts pride. The twig, the word for sprout is like twig or branch. And that was interesting as well. But what puzzled me even more was that the lips of the wise protect them.
Mm-hmm.
That was just something that puzzle me. I've never seen where wisdom protected. Is that talking about wisdom protecting fools?
I think it's the wisdom protecting the wise, or the
Oh, I
lips of
see.
the
Yeah,
wise
it
preserve
goes
them.
back to the wise. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is another verse where the English Standard Version is not so literal. It differs from some others.
But sometimes people that are wise or really wise don't take their own advice and stuff, and it doesn't protect them. I mean, they'll speak wisdom, but then they turn around and do the opposite of that wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hypocritical of people like even Solomon. For example, Solomon, who wrote this, he spoke all this wisdom, but he ended up falling back into the very stuff that he spoke against. How could you have that knowledge and that much wisdom and fall into the same exact traps that you spoke against?
Over and
That
over.
over and over.
On the other hand, despite all of Solomon's bad decisions, he did live to an old age. I mean, he was involved in very few wars. By what wisdom he did have, the way he did it was probably not the best, or what definitely was not the best. But he did use his wisdom to form alliances with a lot of neighboring kingdoms, and he gained peace for Israel. On an economic and a military level, his wisdom did protect both him and the nation, at least from physical threats. He brought in a lot of idolatry with those same treaties. So that's kind of a double-edged sword there.
I hate to say it,
this. Go ahead. Sorry.
I hate to say it, but he almost sounds like a Bill Clinton type of Israel.
Yeah, I suppose so. The first part of this verse, by the mouth of a fool comes a rod for his back. That's how the English Standard Version reads.
Yeah.
But King James, in the mouth of the foolish is a rod of pride, which seems to be saying it's worded very differently. I think the meaning is the same. This is one of those instances where the ESV is a very loose translation, but I think it gets the meaning right, because by the things that the fool says, he earns himself a rod. That stick, it's not talking about a stick that's growing, but a stick that is cut off and used to beat him with. Whereas by the things that a wise person says, he protects himself. And it's, because he knows how to say the right things to the right people. Whereas a fool is always saying the wrong things to the wrong people, getting himself into trouble.
So this is like the teacher taking the stick to the person who just said something very foolish or did something very foolish.
Yeah, and I think literally what it's getting at is the end results of the foolish things that a person says. If you say something insulting to somebody, you might just get a beating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, a lot of the wisdom in Proverbs it's like things that we all know. It's very obvious, but he puts it in a way that really makes you think about it. And it's one of the reasons that Proverbs are used, because they, either the cadence or the imagery that they use really help cement those things into your mind. All right. Anybody else?
I was just noticing something that I just mentioned to my mom and my stepmom. I saw the phrase talk is cheap. I saw it right here. In all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty. I was like, Mom, that's talk is cheap right there in the Bible. There's a lot of phrases you hear in common table talk that you don't even think about, and then you're reading and you're like, this is where it came from, and it doesn't even occur to you until you actually read it.
Yeah, a lot of those things are maybe direct quotes from Benjamin Franklin or some other writer, but the principles came from Scripture. Somebody like Ben Franklin is homeschooled. He was educated from the Bible. That was his textbook. Same thing with George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. All of these really smart people, the founding fathers, were all educated from the Scriptures. They didn't always follow what the Scriptures say, but that's how they learned. And so a lot of the things that they say, a lot of the principles they wrote into our Constitution came from Scripture, because they couldn't help but base things on the Scripture. It's what they knew. It had been pounded into them from the youngest age. How about what surprises somebody else? Anything sneak up on you that you weren't expecting? I mean, besides that one, which is a good one.
I think verse 28 snuck up on me. It surprised me. I think if I'm correct, the word, the subject there, the king, is the same in the following line. I don't know what you would say, stanza or line or what you would call it, but it says a king's glory lies in having many subjects. If the and mine says prince's people are few, it is in his room, but it's actually ruler, I believe, if correct. It's talking about the same person, and I was not expecting that. I thought it was too different at first glance, but it's talking about the same ruler, the same king.
I think the king and the prince here are the same, I think.
Yeah, that surprised me. I wasn't expecting that.
King is Melech, and the prince is the Razon. Not familiar with that word. Yeah,
Razon just means ruler, I think. It's just a laxer way of saying it, I think. That's what surprised me. I was thinking it was going to say Melech again, but it doesn't. It says Razon instead, which seems very similar to the word rapzon, but I know that's a different word. It did surprise me. I wasn't expecting that when I looked at the Hebrew on it.
How do you think that this idea actually affects the way that kings and rulers of all kind behave?
If you look at the vast kingdoms and their multitudes of people in their kingdom, you see them being more successful. You look at empires like Rome. You look at even Israel had a bunch of people for some time until they got into a civil war. But you look at any vast empire of the Mongols, the list goes down the line. The more people you have in your kingdom, the more likely it is prosperous and successful, because I guess the amount of money, I mean, when you have a kingdom, you take tribute from people of all your subjects, and the people of the land have to pay you tribute in some way. That's the way I always understood it. And so they would pay tax or a tribute or whatever the decree was, they would have to pay to the king. So if you have less than that, then you're definitely not going to have a kingdom that's going to last very long. And I think people like Napoleon knew that. And they weren't necessarily trying to be, at first, I don't think they were necessarily crazy. I think they went crazy because they got their heads full of power and greed and all that, which does corrupt people. But I think they did understand that if you're going to have a successful rule as a king, the more people, the better. But anyway.
Yeah, definitely. This reminded me of Romans 13. And I'm going to take this verse as my springboard to get political. So I think every tyrant, no matter how authoritarian, no matter how hard they are on the people, to some extent, they still have to be good to their people. You can't be totally evil and maintain your power. No matter how tyrannical somebody gets, the people still have to be fed. You can't raise an army from people who are starving to death. You have to have enough food to keep them going, to build your weapons of war, to run your industry, and to man the army. So, I mean, even though you look like somebody like Stalin murdered millions of people because of his political policies, but he still managed to feed millions more. He still punished murderers, even though he was one. He still managed mostly to keep the peace within the Soviet Union, even though the people were oppressed. And, Paul wrote Romans 13. He wrote it to a mixed group of Gentiles and Jews in the city of Rome. And I don't know who was the emperor at this time. Nero was the one who was famous during Paul's lifetime. And he was not a good guy. But during his lifetime, most Romans loved him. They thought he was a great ruler. And it's because he had policies that favored the economic growth of Rome. He brought lots of wealth. He brought lots of good things to the Roman people, even though he himself was a depraved maniac. And if he had been totally evil, if he had abused his own people, starved them, destroyed the economy, he wouldn't have lasted. The people would have rebelled. And that's true for every government. The government has to give something back to the people, or the people will take their support away. And the king can't rule without at least some support of the people. That is the ultimate source of every ruler's power, is the people that he rules over. Well, ultimately, the source of all power is God. But God puts the rulers over the people, and they derive their power, their ability to do anything from those people. And in our modern world, that is still true. But you look at a lot of the things that are happening with, the World Economic Fund and Gates and Soros and, COVID and the vaccines and all this crazy stuff that's going on, what I call the techno mafia. Big companies like Cisco and Microsoft and Apple and Facebook and Twitter, all of these companies actively colluding with each other and the government to control what people can speak and where they can go and even what they can think, because they get people when they're young enough that they can mold their minds and get people to believe things that are absurd. What they're really working towards is the ability to imprison people, to force you to think the way they want you to think, to force you to do whatever they want you to do, and to even die if that's what they decide for you, without you having any ability to withdraw your support or to coordinate with other people who oppose them. That is the ultimate goal, to turn every person essentially into the batteries of the matrix. Now, we're not literally going to be plugged into a computer, but that's how they want to treat us. The technology and the laws around technology are being crafted to allow them to do that, to sidestep this principle that a ruler gets his power from the people. When they are no longer accountable to the people that they rule, they can do whatever they want. Don't know what to do about that. I know that there are some people who are trying to change that, but I don't necessarily trust those people either. People like Elon Musk, who bought Twitter and has revealed a whole bunch of stuff that, we all knew but couldn't prove. Well, he proved it. He showed it to us. Donald Trump, who I also don't trust, showed us a lot of things that were going on behind the scenes. We need those people to, even though they're not good people, we still need them to be able to fight that system. And, ultimately this is in God's hand. God is the whole world is under his control. He steers the course of history, not the United Nations or the World Economic Fund or any of those people. They are just tools in God's plan. But the world has the potential to become a very dark place in the near future. And there's not a whole lot the average Joes like us can do about it.
I agree with you completely. The greatest prison, I think, to me, is the prison of our own minds. If they can lock you up in your own mind, lock you up in situations, blackmail, internal struggles with all the medicines, the pharmaceuticals, if they can lock you up in so much of your own problems and occupy your mind, and then they move on to the next person and the next person and the next person until they have almost everybody under the same situation where they're all feeding off of where they're desperate and they're willing to feed off of anything they can to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when they got you. That's when they ultimately have got you. But here's the thing, though. Like you say, God is in control. God is the one who brings freedom and justice and light, reveals the darkness. It only takes a remnant. Even though the darkness gets darker, we have to get brighter. That's the goal for us as believers.
Totally agree.
And Paul was a light in the darkness. He went into the toughest places in Rome, and he was in the face of the emperor himself, basically, teaching the words of Yeshua, but he lived despite being tortured to death and all that stuff. I think this is something I'm going to do a study on, is fear. I'm going to do a Bible study on fear, because fear seems to be the thing that is most misunderstood with people, both believers and non-believers, what fear really is. And I think fear, in this instance, there's two types of fear. There's godly fear, and then there's the worldly fear. And the worldly fear gets us concerned and worried over every little thing that's going on around us. The godly fear is the internal fear that we fear our Creator and we bow down to Him. We're prostrate before Him in our minds and even in the physical. I think you're exactly right. Everything around us seems to be going in a direction that's leading to a technocracy where it's controlled by technology. Who can manipulate it better? Who can run the table? We've got to either wake up or we bow down. I mean, that's just what it's going to be. So
yeah, I think you've really hit on the solution there. The solution, of course, is to put your fear and trust in God, not in man or technology. When they try to control your mind, when they try to force you to believe things that are not true and to drug yourself so that you can't tell anymore, just to keep saying no. And the more people who will refuse to believe that 2 + 2 = 5, that a Y chromosome equals a woman, the harder it is for those people to ultimately control everybody. And the larger proportion of us average Joes that they don't control, the less real power they have, and the less power they have to control other people who don't know better. So as long as you can see reality, as long as you can tell the truth from a lie, stand on the truth. Fear God, not man.
Amen.
That, while you're talking about the fear of the Lord, verse 26 is a good one. You know, the fear of the Lord, in the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. I wondered about the meaning of his children will have a refuge. And the first thing that came to mind is that a man who fears God, he believes in justice, he believes in righteousness. His children can come to him for good advice, for physical protection even, you know, financial help, whatever it is they need, they can come to him. And if he believes it will help them, then he'll give it to them. If he believes it will harm them, then he won't. And so in that way, he is a refuge to his children. But it actually goes more than that. The things that he taught them before they left his house are also a refuge for them outside of his house. You know, for one, his reputation follows them if they stay in the same community, because people know their father and know that he is wise. That reputation will be inherited by his children to an extent. I mean, eventually everybody is judged by their own behavior and their own words. But people will give you the benefit of the doubt if they know your father or both your parents and they are good people. But those things that you teach your children, even if they don't stay in your community, they're going to take that with them. They might rebel. All children do eventually. They rebel in some way. But on the whole, raise up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he won't depart from it. Again, principles, not laws. Those commandments, those principles that you teach your children when they're young, those things are a refuge for them when they're old. And that goes to this same principle. If enough parents are teaching their children when they're young, it gets harder and harder for tyrants to control them. When the government believes that they own your children and they educate your children for you, they are not going to educate them into the fear of God. You know, even if it starts that way, it's not going to end that way. They are going to teach your children to despise God, to despise your values, because they're not interested in you or in what's right or wrong. They're interested in creating batteries for the machine. And that's it.
Exactly right. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that strong confidence is on the fact that the children are going to obey. That obedience is what gives them refuge, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the first name that came to mind was Noah. Noah built the ark out of obedience and fear of God, and they took refuge in what he constructed that God told him to construct out of obedience.
Mm-hmm.
So that his children took refuge because of his fear of God. He was that righteousness. He was righteous in all his generations. And that righteousness involves fearing God, I believe. Because you can't, if you don't have the fear of God, you can't be righteous. There's no turning to God for anything if you don't have the fear of God.
That is true. Yeah, 2 out of 3 of Noah's children took that refuge into their old age too. Just another point on the idea that the Proverbs are principles and not laws, because Ham, Shem, and Japheth were the 3 children. Shem and Japheth were, as far as we know, were righteous men. Ham obviously was not. So there are no guarantees there. These are tendencies, not laws of the universe. All right. So what speaks to you, puzzles you, surprises you, or offends you? Anything else that anybody wanted to talk about? I think I covered all 4 for me. Verse 25 actually is one that I think is worth talking about. The King James Version is a very popular one in evangelical circles. A true witness delivereth souls, but a deceitful witness speaketh lies. It is true that a true witness for God, a witness for Yeshua, is going to deliver souls from condemnation. That is definitely true. I just don't think that that's what this verse is talking about. In a way it is, because Satan is the accuser. He's the false accuser. He wants to accuse people of whatever crimes he can come up with, whether they're actually guilty or not. And the second half is talking about false witnesses. A false witness comes to court and he's going to try to get somebody condemned. A true witness comes and delivers that person from the false witness. And that's what's really happening here. When it talks about souls, the word is nephesh, and it's talking about the person's life. So a true witness delivers, or a true witness rescues lives. And, one of the things we can derive from that is that if you do have knowledge of a crime, you need to speak up. You can't be silent, because somebody may end up being convicted wrongly if only, the wrong people step forward. If you know what really happened, you saw it, you need to say something. That's also in Torah. If you witness a crime, you are responsible to be a witness. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go to the police and say, somebody did this bad thing. You don't have to be the tattletale of the neighborhood. But if somebody is accused of a crime and you have knowledge of it, then you need to be there, whether they did it or they didn't.
I got a question, real quick on that same verse 25. Is that, you said that word was nephesh for soul?
Mm-hmm.
Which actually is, what I've learned about that is nephesh is spirit. Is that correct?
Well, it's can be translated as soul, as in the entire being. So like when we talk about a ship sinking at sea, we say 25 souls were lost. It's really talking about the entire being. Sometimes it's translated as the flesh or the body, sometimes as soul. If it's talking about a spirit specifically, then it will usually use the word ruach. I think there might be another word or two that are used there too, but nephesh either means the entire being or the flesh, one of those two.
Okay.
Which of course includes the spirit, because the spirit is a part of your being.
Yeah.
This gets confusing in English because we use the term soul and spirit interchangeably.
Yeah. And neshama, that's another term that gets confused between nephesh and neshama. I think those two get confused.
Remind me, what is that word?
Neshama.
I know it's familiar. Yeah.
It's soul, and it can be between soul and spirit. It's like, it can be soul, sometimes it can be spirit, it can be both. So it's sort of like nephesh, sort of, but it's kind of like 50-50 used. Sometimes it's talking about the human soul, sometimes it's talking about the spirit, and then sometimes I take that back, it's 50-50. Sometimes it's talking about all of it together, like nephesh. It's a really interesting word, neshama is. I think it's used in, the first usage of it is in Genesis, where God breathed into Adam and he became a living soul. And I think that term is neshama that is used there for a living soul.
This one, it's...
Oh, it is nefesh. Okay. I'm trying to think of when it's first, neshama.
Oh, here it is, in the breath.
That's it, the breath. That's what I was thinking of, the breath. The breath of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it can be used euphemistically for every breathing creature. So any creature that is alive and breathing.
Right. What's interesting about it also is it's a feminine word. That's because God, that's supposedly what the feminine aspect of God is he can create, because he can create life. That was one of the aspects of God. Not that he's female, but that he has the ability to give life like women are able to give life.
Yeah, well, if mankind is created in God's image, then God includes both masculine and feminine traits.
And men give life to things with their words. And they give life to children through women.